Hello everyone, am I audible and is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible and your screen is visible, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's start today's session. I'm sorry for the delay, I had some technical issues. Should we start or do you think should we wait for some other people to enter? There are just 9 members right now. Or it's fine, I guess we should start. Hi everyone, I am Geetika Agarwal. I am a PhD scholar at ISC Bangalore. I'll be taking your today's tutorial for week 3 for wildlife ecology. Okay. So, in this week, we studied about interactions, positive interactions, negative interactions, and in general, how do we study behavior and what is behavioral ecology. So, let me ask you this: what are interactions? Guys, anyone? You can type it out in the chat box. Let's have an interactive session. So, what are interactions? Nobody? Okay. So, talking with each other is an interaction. Yeah, that is true. So basically, anything that you do that might be impacting some other organism would be called an interaction. Effects that one organism has on another organism. In a community, in a species, in a population, anything. That will be interaction. So there are various classifications of interactions that were taught this week. So let's see how are interactions classified based on who you're interacting with and based on how you're interacting with them. So, first, tell me, how do you think we classify interaction based on who you are interacting with? Anyone? Guys, this is very simple. Nobody? Okay. So, basically, if you want to classify interaction based on who you are interacting with, one would be an intraspecific interaction where you're interacting with your conspecifics, you're interacting with other organisms that belong to the same species as you do. So if I'm interacting with other human beings, that would be an intraspecific interaction. But if I'm and the other one would be an interspecific interaction where you're interacting with organisms that belong to another species. So if I'm petting a dog, that will be an interspecific interaction. Or if I am watering my plants, that is also an interspecific interaction. So can you guys give me some examples of some intraspecific or interspecific interactions? Some very simple examples. Anybody? No one? Say you have a if you have a bird nest and the parents are feeding their chicks, what would be that interaction? Like which sort of an interaction would that be? Intraspecific, right? If you have two lions fighting for a territory, that would also be intraspecific. And if you want to go to interspecific interactions, those would be like were discussed, the cheetal langur interactions, or interaction between a cattle and a buffalo, or cattle egret and a buffalo, those things. And how do you interact? We classify the interactions based on how do we interact as either harmonious interactions, where the two species or the two participants of the interaction, they're interacting positively, and at least one of them is getting a benefit out of those interactions. And inharmonious interactions, where both the species, where there is a overall negative impact of the interaction, at least on one of the interacting participants, right? So moving on, we have these different forms of interactions and we have this table. So can you guys tell me what should be the signs in these two columns based on which interaction we are talking about? So, coming to mutualism, how does it impact the two participants who are interacting mutualistically? So, what is the impact on both of them? What would be the sign in these columns? Anyone? When we're talking about mutualism, or like two species that are interacting with each other, okay. Two different species for what? Like, what are you answering here? For mutualism. Yeah, mutualism, okay, yes, it happens between two different species, but what I'm asking is what sort of an interaction is it? How are both of them impacted? Are they both gaining from from the interaction, or they both losing something, or one of them is gaining, other one is losing? What is happening in this interaction? Yes, it is favorable to both the species. So the sign in this table should be positive. Both of them benefit, right? And similarly, in competition, what will happen? What do we see in competition? Competition can be both. It can be intraspecific as well as interspecific. But what is the impact of competition on the participants? Okay. So in competition, you will notice that both the parties of the interaction, they'll be negatively impacted. Neither of them is going to get a benefit out of that competition, but instead they're both going to face some sort of a cost. Okay. And what is predation? This should be simple. Predation, parasitism. What are these interactions? Are they gaining something? Are they losing something? Guys, it would be better if this is a sort of an interactive meeting because there's just like eight of us. But okay. So predation is basically one of them is gaining something and the other one is losing something, because the predator is basically going to eat up the prey. So the predator has a positive effect and the prey is being harmed. Similarly, in the parasitism, the parasite is going to be positively impacted by parasitizing the host, and the host is going to be harmed. In commensalism, we see that one of the species is positively impacted and the other one is neither impacted, is not impacted at all. It is neither benefited nor harmed, right? And the one of them is getting a benefit out of that interaction. And the opposite of this would be amensalism, in which one of them is harmed, but the other one is not impacted at all. It is neither gaining anything nor losing anything. And if there's an interaction in which none of the species has any impact of that interaction, that we term as neutralism, because both of them are neutral towards each other. Coming to something called proto cooperation. So, can anyone tell me what is proto cooperation? If you have watched the videos during over the week, you would have learned what exactly is proto cooperation. It is a very simple concept. So, if any one of you would like to tell me what it is, it will be nice. Okay, two species interact with each other, and what happens? What sort of an interaction is it? Both are benefited, yes. And one important point of this interaction, how is it different from mutualism? So basically, proto cooperation is not obligatory for the survival of the organism. Both the parties, yes, both the species of the interaction, they are benefited, but they, yes, they do not have to be together always. So mutualism is of multiple kinds. There is obligatory, there is facultative. So this would be one sort of a facultative mutualism where they don't have to be together at all times. But whenever they will come together, they will get a positive, they will get a benefit out of that interaction if they interact. They interact purely for the gain that they receive from doing. Yes, yes, Sabrish, you're correct. So they interact for the gain that they receive from the interaction. So, what do you see in this image? What is happening? Can anybody tell me what is going on in this image? Yeah, there's a bird in a crocodile's mouth. It's cleaning the teeth, exactly. So, if you look at this image, somebody who's not familiar with these concepts would wonder why is the crocodile has opened its mouth wide open and is not even eating the bird, it's just letting it sit there. What is going on? So basically the crocodile is getting benefited from the bird cleaning its teeth. If something is stuck in the crocodile's teeth, it is going to clean it, and the bird out of this is getting food. So both of the parties are getting benefited out of this interaction. So what is this image showing, and how are these two things interacting with each other? Yes, there's a hermit crab and there's a sea anemone. So you can see that there's this crab. So it has found this empty shell and it basically is living inside that shell. And there is this anemone that is stuck on top of the shell. So basically, what is going on in this interaction? The hermit crab can provide transport to the sea anemone. It can move around, and the tentacles of the sea anemone are in turn going to provide protection to that hermit crab from predation. Right? So this is also a positive interaction for both the parties. What is going on in this image? These are examples that were shown during the lecture as well. So you can see there's a hippopotamus, you can see there's a lot of fish, but why are all these fish like surrounding the hippo and what is going on? Here again, a similar thing is happening as was happening with the crocodile. These fish, they surround the hippopotamus basically to clean its body of any dead cells, of any parasites, and also they're also cleaning its teeth. So the hippo, in turn, is not going to eat the fish because that would like prevent them from coming again to help the hippopotamus. So here, both the species are gaining something. The fish is getting food and nutrition out of this interaction, and the hippo is getting cleaning services. And the last one. So, what do you see in this image? What is going on? Germs in cleaning hippo. Yes, Avarish, you're correct about the last image. So, what do you see in this image? And are you familiar with this example? So, you can see that there are these ants and aphids. Exactly. So, there are these ants, two big ants, and there are some of these aphids. So, what happens in this interaction is that these aphids they feed on plant and they secrete a sugary secretion. So they give out this sugary secretion, which, yes, and the ants take this secretion and they use it to feed their larvae and also to derive nutrition from this secretion themselves. And sometimes the ant even train the aphids in such a way that they secrete this directly in their mouth parts so that they can carry it with them. And in turn, what are aphids getting out of this interaction? Can anybody guess? How are the ants helping the aphids? They themselves are getting food, very good, but how are the aphids getting benefited out of this interaction? Anybody? Can you please? Aphids are transported to the roots. Sort of, but what exactly are the ants doing? Aphids can move, they don't need to be like carried by the ants or anything. So basically, what happens is that these ants they will provide protection to these aphids. They will prevent any predators from approaching the aphids as they have these stinging bites. So, if aphids are providing them with food, the ants are providing them with protection. Okay, moving on, talk about mutualism. It is very similar to proto cooperation, but just with one major difference is that this is necessary for the survival of the two organisms, or you find them together most of the times. It is obligatory. So both of the species they interact and they get positive results or they get benefits out of these interaction, and this is also obligatory for their survival. So what do you see in this image? This is a mutualism, and like what is this example? Anyone? Roots, yes, these are roots and these are legumes. So this is an example of a leguminous plant which has rhizobium in their roots, yes. And these, as you would all know, the rhizobium provide them nitrogen and the roots or the plant provides them nutrition and a place to stay, right? So they are getting food and a place to stay, and the in turn the plant is getting nutrition, nitrogen, which it cannot directly use from the atmosphere. It needs nitrogen in the fixed form, and these rhizobia they fix it for the plant and they provide it. I would just like to make it clear that guys, you can ask me questions at any point in between. You can interrupt me, and or you can put it up in the chat box and we can discuss the query at hand. Okay, the next one, what is this? You all can recognize this, I guess. What are these and which two organisms interact? in this scenario? Algae and this is basically an image of corals, and in corals, you find an interaction between the coral and the algae or the zooxanthellae, and they provide them with nutrition while corals provide them with a space for staying. And if these zooxanthellae, so what is happening right now because of climate change, global warming, the temperatures are rising, and these zooxanthellae they get expelled from the corals, which leads to the death of these corals as well as of the algae. So this is therefore a mutualistic interaction as it is obligatory for their survival. Coming to the last example. So here we have an image of a termite which feeds on wood, and in the stomach of the termite you find microbes basically that can break down the cellulose that is present in the wood. So termites themselves cannot digest cellulose, but it is these bacteria that are present in the gut of the termites that digest it for them. So basically, they're getting nutrition and they're getting a space to stay inside the termite stomach, and the termite is getting digested food, which also happens in ruminants when you see that they have the bacteria that can uh, break down their food, their again cellulose from the fibers and grasses that they consume. Moving on, we have commensalism. I forgot to put the animation in this image, that is why you can see everything at once. So basically, commensalism is an interaction in which one of the participants is getting benefited and the other one is unaffected. It is neither harmed nor benefited. So, what do we see in this image? What is going on? Why are all these fishes following a shark? Can anybody guess? Yes, exactly. So basically, the shark here will be feeding on some of the food or on the fishes or other marine life, and the small fishes sometimes they provide cleaning services, but in the example of commensalism, these fishes they just follow the shark, and whenever the shark eats food, obviously some of the food is going to get spilled, it is going to get expelled out of the shark's mouth, and all those food these fishes they will capture. So the fishes are getting benefited by getting all the leftovers of the shark, but the shark itself is not getting anything out of that interaction. And the second one is a very famous example of cattle egret following the buffaloes around. Basically, when the buffaloes, you can even see them following, say, tractors in the agricultural fields or these plowing machines. Why? Because when the sand is getting plowed or when the tractors are moving, when the buffaloes are moving, they're disturbing all the insects that are present in the grass or they're present underground, and these will fly out, and the cattle egret will then consume all of these insects that it otherwise would have to put much more energy into finding all those insects. Okay, the next one is neutralism. In this, both the parties are basically unaffected by the interaction. So there are very few examples of neutralism out there, because if you study so if you think that two trees that are far away from each other would be neutral, they're not impacting each other, but in the end they still have an impact because their roots might be connected underground, they might be sharing nutrition like that, or other interactions where you but if you say that species that are staying far away, for example, say there are two dogs, one in one street and the other one in the other street, they're neutral towards each other, but they also might be interacting in some way, or the other one would be they're not interacting at all. Why do you want to call it neutral at all? Because they might not be interacting. So, but yes, neutralism is an interaction in which both the parties are unaffected, and the examples of which are very rare. Moving on to competition, as we all discussed, yes, competition is an interaction in which both the parties that are interacting they suffer a loss out of that interaction. And what when it exactly happens is when both the participants they share a resource, when they have coinciding niches or their niches overlap either partially or completely. Okay, So if in a habitat you have, say, two herbivores, both of them are feeding on grass, and the other one, say, can also feed on leaves. So we will say that these both can compete, or they might be competing with each other for the resource that is grass, because that is the overlapping resource, right? So there are two types of competitions out there that were discussed also. One of them is an interference competition, and the other one is an exploitative competition. Interference competition is also called a contest. It involves a direct conflict between the two parties, and the exploitative competition is also called a scramble competition. It is mostly an indirect competition. So, an interference is when either both of them they fight head on, and one of them wins. It does not let the other one approach the resource at all. This can either, the resource here can either be mates, it can be a territory, or it can be a food resource. So if one of the organisms is defending a territory, and it is not letting the other organism even approach that territory, then of course that is an interference. That is a contest for the territory. You are not allowed to enter the territory. So that will be an interference competition. Exploitative competition, on the other hand, would be if there are, say, different species that are feeding on grass. There are zebras, there are deers, there are these wildebeests. They are all feeding on grass. They're all competing for the same resource. But if one of these species can feed faster, or if you are in a group, if there's a herd of zebras, they're all feeding on the same grass patches. If one of them, or if some of them can eat faster than the other, then they are better at competing than the others are. Others will be left behind with a little resource, because most of it is taken up by the few competitive organisms. Is competition clear to everybody? Should we move on? You can react with the thumbs up, or okay. Yes, let's move on. So, are you all aware what is allelopathy? It was covered in the lecture, that is why I am talking about it. What do we mean by allelopathy? Or do you remember when was it talked about in the class or in the lecture, say? Okay, yes, it was talked about when they were talking about competition in plants. But allelopathy basically is when it's a phenomena in which one organism is going to produce chemicals, and these are called biochemicals because a living organism is producing them. And these biochemicals, they're going to influence the growth, the survival, development, reproduction of other organisms. So the influence that this has on the other organism, it could be either positive or negative, both. But the example that was given in lecture was, yes, about having a negative impact on the other plants. So some examples of allelopathy will also be even in the case of the penicillium example, that the colonies of penicillia, even so they secrete this penicillin, which is going to impact the other bacteria, and it is not allowed to grow. So this is what we mean by allelopathy. Anybody has any doubts about this phenomena? So the basic examples, there are antibiotics, and there are these chemicals that we talked about in the plant. The plant is shedding leaves, and those leaves, they might have these chemicals that mix with the soil, and they hamper the growth of other species around this plant. So in general, allelopathy itself is not a competition. It's basically just a phenomena in which the biochemicals influence the other organisms. They can either enhance or they can suppress. But what was covered in the lecture was, yes, it was a type of competition. So you should, uh, while answering the questions, I guess you should take it as a type of competition. And the example that was discussed was this one, in which the leaves of the tree that are shed, they contain these chemicals that prevent the growth of other species. Okay. So moving on, do you all know what is apparent competition, or what can you think? What comes to your mind when you hear the term apparent competition. Anyone? Yes, it is not a direct competition, correct. So apparent itself seems like it is an apparent competition. It looks like it's a competition. So where it happens, basically the scenario it happens in is when you have two prey species that share a common predator, and when they interact with each other, the competition is called an apparent competition. So what happens is, so you have two species, say A and B, and they have a common predator, say C. And when, so if the C is a generalist, it can either feed on A or it can feed on B, both of them. So but A suddenly has shoot up in its population density, so it has increased in numbers greatly, so you have a lot of A around, and you have the same amount of B's. So since the predator can now feed on all of these individuals that belong to the species A, because there are so many of them, so the in turn the predator is going to increase in number, because there is a lot more nutrients or a lot more resource available for it because of shoot up in the population of A. But now, because the predator is on the rise, there is much more predator, and they can also consume the species B. The predation pressure on B has increased. So A was not trying to harm B while it was increasing its population, but in the end, it has harmed the other prey species as well. So it was an indirect competition on sorts. It appears to be a competition between the two prey species that share the common predator. Is that okay? So, some characteristics of the apparent competition seem to be that the predator of these two species is a food limited generalist. So, what that means is generalist is a species that can feed on more than one type of food resources. It is not limited to a single type of food resource. So, a predator can feed on both the species A and B. Food limited means that the number of predators out there is limited by the amount of resource. So right now you have 10 predators only because you just have 50 of the prey, like 50 individuals of the prey. But if say the prey individuals were to increase in number, the predator would also increase in number, because the number of the predator is only limited by the amount of resource that is available. So that is what we mean by the first characteristic. Second means that the prey here can act as a keystone species. So a keystone species is, so you call some species a keystone species if the impact that it has on the ecosystem around it is much greater than its own numbers in that ecosystem. So say a species is small in number itself, but the impact it is having is much greater than that. So here the prey species A itself is not in very high numbers, but since it increases a little, the predator increases a little, it is impacting the other prey species that it can prey upon, so it is acting as a keystone species, it is impacting a lot of the other species around it. So the third characteristic is that some prey get extinct due to the apparent competition. So the other prey species, that was say B in this case, it might get extinct because of the increased predator pressure. The predators may be consuming them so fast that they are just getting extinct from the ecosystem. And the last one would be that the prey trophic level is impacted by both the predator as well as the environment. It is not just the predator that is impacting the prey, but also the environment around it. So, is this clear to everybody? Any doubts? Is there any connection with trophic? No. So basically, there is a connection with trophic cascade because we're talking about predators and preys. Trophic cascade is basically any interaction that you have between different trophic levels. So here, since this interaction involves a predator as well as a prey, there are two trophic levels involved. That is why there's a connection with the trophic cascade. Okay, moving on. So, what are the various impacts of a parent competition? Can you guys tell me what are the impacts of a parent competition, or any guesses? Nobody? Okay. So let's discuss the various impacts that an apparent competition has. So basically, the this is going to lead to a reduced equilibrium density and a reduced growth rate of the prey species. Since there were two prey species, A was increasing and that impacted B. So the equilibrium density and the equilibrium growth rate for this prey species B is going to get affected by this apparent competition. Okay, it is not going to be able to grow as much as it could grow earlier because now the predation pressure is on a rise. This apparent competition, it impacts the dynamics of the predator prey relationship, that we saw that yes, the prey is impacting the predator and the predator in turn is impacting the other prey species as well. There is a top down regulation of food webs. A top down regulation basically means that you have predators. If the predators increase in number, the prey will go down in number. If the prey grows down in number, the predator will be impacted by that. So the different trophic levels are impacting each other, and in this case what we are seeing is the predator is going up in numbers, and that is why the prey will go down in numbers, the second prey species that is getting impacted. And it provides a positive feedback for invasive species. So one important example that was discussed in the lecture was about lantana species. So it was discussed that lantanas, they grow widely in a forest. And why is that? Because lantanas, they produce a lot of flowers and a lot of fruits. That will lead to an increase in the species that is going to consume these fruits and flowers, say birds and insects and all these pollinator species. These species, when they increase in numbers, they're going to feed upon other plant species as well that have fruits and that have flowers. But that might lead to a decrease in the other plant species because they are not growing as much as lantana is growing. And also, because this lantana species is able to grow in a lot of different habitats, so when these birds, they consume the lantana fruit and they fly and they will defecate somewhere else, those seeds will sprout and more lantana will grow. So it leads to a positive feedback for the lantana species itself. It on one hand, it is positively impacting its own growth because it is producing a lot of fruits which are getting eaten up by the birds and then getting transported to other areas, and it's sprouting in all these places. Second impact is that because there is a lot of lantana, it is impacting the growth of other plant species in that area, other native plant in that area, because they are not growing as much as the lantana is growing, so they get harmed by the same species of birds, and they're not growing as fast because of all of this. Is that clear? Should we move on? Okay. So let me ask you, what are generalist versus what are specialist species? So we discussed in a parent competition that the predator should be a generalist. So what do you mean by a generalist, and what do you mean? So consequently, what do you mean by a specialist? Can anyone tell me? It is. Um, it should come to you pretty obviously from the two terms themselves. Based on prey preference, okay. Anything else? Like, can you elaborate what based on prey preference? What would a generalist do and what would a specialist do? Okay, so basically, a generalist is a species that can feed on a variety of food types, and not just food types, it can also thrive in a variety of different conditions. Say, if you're talking about temperature conditions, if you're talking about the amount of rainfall, humidity, or the different elevations that can organism can live at, or the different areas it can get its food from. So that would fall under a generalist species. Specialists, on the other hand, they have a very specific diet that they specialize on, and therefore their niche is also very narrow. They can only survive in those particular conditions, and if anything were to happen to either the food resource of the specialist species or to the habitat, say the temperature changes or the rainfall patterns change, seasonality changes, then these specialists are going to get impacted very severely because they're not able to survive or they're not able to adapt as quickly as a generalist can. Okay, so to give you some examples here, so a specialist species would have a koala bear or a panda, say. So a koala bear is specialized to feed only on eucalyptus leaves, and sometimes even in the koala populations, some of the koala bears, they're specialized to eat eucalyptus out of only a few of these trees. They do not, venture out and feed on any eucalyptus trees. They have these fixed trees only which they feed on. So if anything were to happen to those trees, these species would get severely impacted. On the other hand, generalist, you would say there are raccoons that are generalists, there are rats, there are crows. These are generalist species. They can feed on a lot of different things. They can feed on human waste. They can feed on, they're omnivorous. They can feed on uh, prey species, like they can predate. They can like kill other species and feed on them, or they can even just feed on the the plant products. So these are called generalists. Some things that are listed out here are specialists have a narrow niche. Yes, generalists have a broad niche. They are less adaptable because they have very specialized needs. These guys are more adaptable to many different environments. Consequently, those guys, the specialists, are more likely to get extinct, but the generalists are very less likely to be affected by these changes and go extinct. As we discussed, specialists use a specific set of resources. Generalists, they use a variety of resources. Specialists easily affected by changing conditions. Generalists are not. They have a high tolerance. Specialists have an advantage if the conditions are very constant, because in those cases, the specialists can very efficiently feed on that one resource that it is specialized to feed on. The generalist, they will have an advantage if the conditions are changing because they can easily adapt to all of this. Is it clear what is the difference between a generalist species versus a specialist species? Okay, so moving on. So now we come to inharmonious interactions. So you all would know inharmonious interactions are basically the one in which at least one of the parties is negatively impacted. So, four different kinds of inharmonious interactions were talked about during the lectures. Coming to them, first of them is cannibalism. Can you tell me what is cannibalism? What do we mean by cannibalism? Eating own species, yes. So, cannibalism is basically the phenomena in which organisms can feed or can sometimes eat members of their own species. So the famous examples that were also given in the lecture were of the black widow spiders and the praying mantis, in which the females, after mating, they will kill and they will feed on the male for nutrition. You would also have heard in a lot of news channels about cannibalism in humans, where some people they kill other people and they sometimes feed on them. That is very gruesome, but okay. So in this species, the this is an intraspecific interaction, and one of the organisms is getting benefited while the other one is definitely getting harmed. Second type is parasitism. I don't know why it did not, is it not, Is it not showing for you guys as well in the shared video? Yeah, wait. None of the others are coming up in the shared meet. Okay, sorry. Let's try again. Yeah. Second one would be a parasitism. So you all must be aware of parasitism. What is a parasite? Benefits itself, harms the host. Yes. So basically, in parasitism, there's a parasite, there's a host, and the parasite will is going to derive benefits from the host, and in turn is going to harm the host. And there are two types of parasitisms or two types of parasites. There are ectoparasites that stay outside the body of the host, and there are endoparasites that enter the body of the host. So example of the ectoparasites would be leeches, would be ticks on the body. You would have noticed ticks on dogs. There are leeches in the forest. These are ectoparasites that they just stick to the body of the host and they do not really enter the host. And the endoparasites would be things like the malarial parasite or viruses and these various diseases that we get. These are all parasites. Some of the parasites can lead to the death of the host, while some of the parasites uh, they will not lead to the death of the host. So, what do you think is more beneficial to a parasite? Should it kill off the host or should it keep the host alive? What do you think is more beneficial from the parasite's point of view? Not to kill, exactly. So, yes, so something that is beneficial to the parasite would be to keep the host alive. Because if the host dies, the parasite inside that host is also going to die. Because that is how it is basically sustaining itself by living inside that host. But the scenario where the parasite can actually lead to the death of the host is if there is a rapid transmission of the parasite from one host to the next. If it can move on to different hosts, that is when it is okay for the parasite to let the host die. Okay. And are you aware with the term parasitoid? What is a parasitoid? Yes. So parasite that is parasitizing another parasite is called a parasitoid. This we see in a lot of insects, in a lot of wasps. There are a lot of parasitoid wasps out there that basically use other insects. They lay their eggs inside other insects, and when the larvae are born, they hatch inside the other organism and they eat up the other organism as for their food, and then they come out. Okay, moving on. The next one is the very simple one, predation. It is the most basic, I would say, interaction out there because there's a predator, there's a prey. The predator is going to kill the prey and consume it. It is a positive negative relationship, and it is the most commonly observed out there. There are a lot of predators. Even we act as predators when we consume, say, anything. Basically, if you even think about a herbivore which is grazing on grass or which is grazing on plants, it is also predating. It is also a predator for that plant. Herbivory is also a form of predation, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Moving on to amensalism. So, amensalism is a type of interaction in which one species is harmed and the other species is unaffected. So, can you give me an example of amensalism? There was a very basic example. Anybody?
Glass is crushed.
Yeah. Trampling of grass by moving herbivores is a very basic example of amensalism. Or if you notice ourselves in our day-to-day lives, when you're walking down the road, we might sometimes step on some insect and we kill it, but we are not getting any benefit out of that interaction, but that organism is getting killed. Or say when things, um, when you pluck a flower, that would be, that would not be a mensualism actually, because you are getting benefited when you're plucking the flower because you want it. But yeah, amensalism is basically some very basic interactions in which one of them is unaffected and the other one is harmed. So a basic example is trampling of grass or any organism for that matter. When an elephant is walking down the a path, it does not know what is coming in its path because it is such a huge animal, so it can easily trample on a lot of different organisms down there. So that would be a amensalism. So how would you define ethology? What is ethology? Yeah, the scientific study of behavior is basically what we mean by ethology. So what do you mean by behavioral ecology then? What are the things that we look at when we talk about behavioral ecology? Okay, so basically in behavioral ecology is also the study of behavior, but in that you're also looking at the, so ethology is the scientific study of behavior, yes, and behavioral ecology basically could be defined as the study of the evolutionary basis of these behavior. When talking about behavior, you don't just look at some behavior, you also look at the evolutionary basis. Why did that particular behavior evolve? And what are the environmental factors that led to the evolution of that behavior? Like what what were the environmental impacts that led to that particular behavior? So, okay, what are some interesting behaviors that you guys can think of or that you would like to study if you want to study animal behavior sometime? Anybody? Can you think of some interesting behaviors that we would like to study or you'd like to observe? Mating behaviors, yes. What else? Parenting behavior, yes, that's a very interesting sort of a behavior. What else? Very basic ones also you can point out. Using tools, tool usage is also a sort of behavior. So there is foraging, there is habitat selection, there is territoriality, there is mating, as you said, there is parental behaviors. Yeah, feeding, foraging behavior. So there are a lot of different behaviors out there that you can basically observe and study. So ecologists out there have been studying all of these behaviors that you can possibly think of, like how they even in the case of ants, they would say how are they constructing their ant hills, or how are the termites constructing the termite mounds. So there are a lot of these different interesting behaviors out there. Or say the bee dance, why does the bee do that particular behavior? What is the use of that behavior? How did it evolve? Why are they using it? All of these things, this comes under the ethology and behavioral ecology. Okay. So, while studying behavior, one of the fundamental approaches of that would be a cost benefit analysis. Do you all know what is a cost benefit analysis? Anyone? Like, When you hear the term cost benefit analysis, what comes to your mind? Nobody? So cost benefit analysis would basically just be an assessment of what are the costs that I'm going to face if I perform this particular activity, and what are the benefits that I'm going to gain from this particular activity or behavior. And yes, what is the difference between the costs and the benefits? Of course, it is like common sense that if I'm going to perform a particular activity or particular behavior, the benefit that I get out of that should be greater than the costs that I'm accruing because of that activity. So here we have these two graphs. One of them, so basically the x-axis shows the size of the territory, and the y-axis shows the benefit that you can gain from the territory. So there are, say, two organisms, B1 and B2. So basically, B1 is a type of species that can gain this much amount of benefit. So as the size of the species territory increases, the amount of benefit also increases, but eventually after reaching a certain size, the benefit will just plateau. It will just flatten, the curve will flatten, and you will not be able to get any more benefit even if you keep on increasing the size of the territory. But the costs that you will face to maintain that territory, to protect that territory, they are going to increase tremendously. So earlier, for maintaining smaller territories, you're going to have a lesser increase in the costs, but eventually the costs are going to increase tremendously. So while choosing how we should uh, what should be the size of my territory, I would obviously want the size of the territory would be somewhere here, where the difference between the benefit and the cost is the maximum. That will be called as the optimum size of the territory that a particular organism should be maintaining. So for the species B1, the optimum size of the territory would be this, which is a smaller territory, and for B2, the optimum size of the territory should be this, which is a slightly bigger size territory. And in the second graph, we have three different costs for the same amount of benefit. So if your costs are less, the amount of territory size that you can handle is bigger, and if your costs are higher, the territory size decreases. And for C3, it is not helpful for you to maintain a territory at all. It does not matter. You should not have a territory at all for uh, the curve C3, right? So, this is one of the approaches that we take while looking at any behavior. If they are performing certain behavior, why? Like, what is the cost that they're going to get from that, and what is the benefit? Even while looking at foraging, what is the amount of time that I'm searching for that prey? What is the amount of time that I'm spending at handling that prey? These two you add up, that will be the cost that you get from that foraging behavior. And the benefit is the amount of nutrition that you derive by eating that prey, by consuming that prey. So the benefit that I'm deriving from consuming the prey should always be greater than the cost that I'm accruing, the handling and the search time. Okay, is that clear, everybody? Should we move on? Anybody has any doubts? Okay. Okay, before moving on, I would like to ask a basic question. We have been discussing ethology, behavioral ecology, all this, but what is behavior? How would you define behavior? Habits of an organism. Okay. Anything else? Things that are done by some species. Okay. Yeah, that is correct. So basically, what you would have learned very early on in your like ninth or tenth is that there is a stimulus, right? Something that happens around you. Either it can be because of the environment. Yes, the reaction to an external stimuli. Yes, that is what I was coming to. So there is a stimulus, and that is going to elicit a response from the organism, right? So behavior encompasses all of the steps, from sensing the stimulus that okay, this has happened, from calculating what you should do now, and to responding to that particular stimuli. So this stimuli could be anything. So when you look at food, that is a stimulus, the sight of food or the smell of food. So all of this, so behavior basically will encompass everything from sensing the stimulus to responding to that stimulus. And yes, anything that is done by a species can be called its behavior. It's eating, it's sleeping, it's mating, it's walking, it's alert and looking out for predators. All of this fall under uh, behaviors. Moving on. So, what is territoriality? And like, how do you define territoriality? Is it interspecific? Is it intraspecific? Or can it be both? And what exactly happens when we're talking about territoriality? Anybody? So, okay. So, when you're talking about territoriality, it basically means that there's an organism that is going to defend a certain set space for the resources that are present there. And this can be both an interspecific or an intraspecific interaction. Intraspecific is when the species is territorial and every individual maintains their own territory in that population. Interspecific is when, like, say, a lion is protecting a territory against, say, leopards and cheetahs and all of these. So, interspecific territoriality is within, like, between the different species, and intraspecific is by the individuals belonging to the same species. And territoriality basically would be a sort of an interference competition, where you defend the territory by either territorial displays. These could be acoustic displays, this could be visual cues, they could be sensory cues like chemicals, pheromones, all of these to maintain the territory. So can you tell me what is the purpose of maintaining the territory? Why should the organisms bother? Why can't they just like let anybody enter in their space? Anyone? Okay, so basically in territoriality, yeah, to reduce competition, that is correct. So what basically happens is I am going to maintain this territory. Why? Because I want unlimited access to the resource that is present inside this territory. And I think I can defend this, and I want all of the resource can be either be food or it can be mates. So if say there's a male and it wants to maintain a territory and it has these three, four females, for that is what happens in say monkeys and even lions. So they basically maintain a territory, and they protect, they herd all these women, they have these females, sorry, they have these harems, and they get sole access to all these females and matings. So that is a resource, so I want unlimited access to the resource, and I do not want competition, as you said. So I do not want competition in this area at all. And eventually one of the benefits of territoriality is also is that it maintains a population size. How? Because a certain environment can obviously handle only so many territories. It will have a carrying capacity, and if the amount of territories has reached its maximum, the other organisms, individuals of the species, they will not be able to maintain their territories or establish their territories, and hence the population numbers will stay in check. But obviously, the costs also come along with maintaining a territory if there are benefits. So you will have to defend the territory, You will have to spend time in patrolling your territory and in taking out rounds and seeing if there's any intruders. You will have to spend time and energy in doing all these displays, these acoustic or visual displays, or when you're spraying the territory with your pheromones or with the scent marking. All of this takes time and it takes energy to maintain a territory. So territoriality comes with both benefits and costs, and it varies from species to species, whether individual and also from habitat to habitat. If it's a resource rich habitat, then it makes sense to maintain a territory, because your patch is very resource rich, and you will like the cost that you incur by maintaining the territory, the benefits are much greater than that because you have a lot of resources. But if the territory is resource poor, then there is no use in maintaining that territory, because anyway the benefit is not as great as the cost. So yeah, monopolization of space by an individual or a group. How is it different from niche? Niche is not territory. Niche is basically what role that organism plays in that habitat. So if I am feeding, so the niches of all of the organisms that belong to a particular species that are territorial will be the same. They all live, say, in the understory. They all feed on insects, all of those birds. So the niche is the same. They're all found in an evergreen forest. They're all feeding on these the same types of understory insects. Niche is the same, but the territory is the space. It's the geographical region that they maintain. Okay, it's the area that they maintain in which only they will feed and the other individuals will not feed. Okay, so moving on. So the other thing that was discussed was altruism. It is a very interesting sort of a behavior. Can anybody tell me what is an altruistic behavior? Yes, sacrifice for relatives. That is basically how you would put it. So basically, the actor or the organism that is performing the altruistic behavior is going to incur a cost, but that is going to benefit the other group members, all its related members. So an altruism, so you call a behavior altruistic when an individual it benefits when the behavior benefits other individuals, or those acts they benefit other individuals to the potential that they will harm the actor itself. They will detriment the actor itself. And you find altruism very commonly in these complex social animals like bees, ants, termites. These are some like insects. And you'll also find altruism in like cooperatively breeding species, in meerkats, all those things. Yes. No, Sabrish, it is not engaging in selfish act for the pleasure of it. That is not what is altruism. So why do we see altruism? Uh, why should I, you know, sacrifice for anybody else? So, how do you justify altruism? Can anyone provide me with an answer for that? Why do you think I should sacrifice for my relatives? Yeah, okay. Whole is greater than the sum of parts. Yes, that is emergent property. But how is that applying here? Can you please elaborate on your answer, Prasanta? Oops. Hi guys, sorry, I seem to have hi. Sorry, I seem to have lost my internet connection back there. So, um, how many slides? Okay, yeah. So I will try to rejoin with my other system as well to display my slides. But till then, we were discussing why do we have altruism, or why should we have altruism? Can any of you tell me? Yeah. So, okay, basically, so why do we have altruism? The answer to that would be because, so as Hamilton said, basically, what happens here is that either kin selection or group selection, these are the two theories that have been put forth. So, kin selection is basically that you are sacrificing for the members of the species that are related to you. So you're genetically related to these members, and if you sacrifice for them, even then your genes are going to get passed on to the next generations. So that is how altruism has come to be, basically because of kin selection, because you are still passing on some amount of your genetic material to the uh, next generations. And group selection, some of the theories for altruism is group selection, that when it comes to altruism, the selection is not acting at the individual level but also at the group level. So it is the group is getting selected for, so the group in which you see altruism, so in the population there will be multiple groups, and in those groups in which you'll see altruism will prosper as compared to the groups in which the individuals will let the other individuals die. Okay. And you would have studied about the Hamilton's rule that was talked about during the lecture, that the when the RB is greater than C. Have all of you watched the lectures, or does anyone know what is RB is great R into B is greater than C? What does that mean basically? So that basically means that when you when the benefit that, yes, R is the coefficient of relatedness. So when the benefit that um the what do you call it, that the relative or that the other individual is getting out of the interaction is weighted with the relatedness between the two individuals. So the benefit, when it is weighted with the relatedness, should be greater than the cost. So if I am acting altruistically, so I will face the cost C, but that cost should be less than the benefit that is being accrued to the other individual for whom I'm acting, multiplied by the relatedness between me and that individual. Is that okay? Okay. So, fine. Moving on, we have the study of behavioral behaviors. So, how do you go out in the field and how do you observe or how do you study behaviors? Can some of you tell me how do we really study behaviors? Yes, you observe. So basically, you go out to the field And you can either, for studying behaviors, you can build ethograms. I will tell you what are ethograms. Or you can build time activity budgets, which would mean basically for, if different behaviors are being performed, what is the amount of time that the organism is spending on these different behaviors. Then the ways of doing this would be, there would be scan sampling, there could be focal animal sampling, and there could be a time budgeted sampling. So what are ethograms? Ethograms are basically inventories of behavior. So you write down all the behaviors that that particular species or that particular individual is doing. And the inventory or that catalog of behaviors will be called an ethogram, where you note down what are the different behaviors and how are you defining these different behaviors. So how would you build an ethogram? When you go out to the field, you will first describe the site. How is the landscape? What is the vegetation there? What time of day is it? And how is the temperature? Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? And all those things. You will note down these different things about the site. And then you can describe the behaviors. Basically, you can describe it either as stand, like any of the behaviors, say they're out there. So in general, if there's a dog, it could be just standing, it could be wagging its tail, it could be like uh, it could be resting on like when its abdomen is also touching the ground. It could be feeding. So all of these different behaviors, you can define them and you can write down the description. That standing on all four legs, so you call this behavior as just standing. Walking, if it's moving. And you can say feeding, if it's actually feeding on something. You can say scratching, if it is scratching itself with its leg, or if it is biting itself. All of these things, so you basically describe the behavior and you name it, you give it some name, and then you carry out the sampling. So how do you sample when you go out to the field? So you can have a focal animal sampling, you can have a scan sampling, you can have an instantaneous sampling. So what is a focal animal sampling? So when you go out to the field and you observe, say, a single individual, so that will be called your focal animal. Say you're observing a herd of black bucks, so you will focus on one single individual and you will note down what all that individual is doing. So if it is a continuous focal animal sampling, so you will continuously write down what it is doing at all these different time points. So you will say you have this time interval, in that you will continuously write down. So that will be a very, very detailed description of the behaviors of that particular animal. But some of the drawbacks will be that it is very tiring. How long can you keep observing and noting down what is going on? So a better way to do it would be to say divide it into different times. Okay, you say that you will observe for 1 minute and then you will rest for 1 minute, then you'll observe for 1 minute, rest for 1 minute. So that will be, you observe in that 1 minute what that individual is doing and you rest, and then you observe again, then you rest. This is one way of doing it. Or you can do an instantaneous sample. So after every say after every 1 minute, you will just write down what you saw that organism doing, and then you will rest for 1 minute. So that is an instantaneous sample. You look at it, you see what it's doing, and then you just write that down, and you don't worry about what is happening in front, like before that or after that. Scan sampling is happens when there's a group or when there's a herd. Like I said, if it's a herd of black bucks, so you can say you can carry out a scan sample. So you start observing, then you write down what each individual is doing. That is one scan. So you write down the time at which you start the scan, you note down what each individual is doing, and you write the end of the scan. This is called scan sampling, and you can carry it out again and again. Okay. So these are some ways of going out in the field and carrying out these sampling methods. Anybody has any doubts with sampling or with how do you describe behaviors or anything? So when you're doing these different sorts of scans or sampling methods, what you get out of this is you can get what is the frequency with which the animal is performing the behavior. So if you're noting that animal for 5 minutes, in those 5 minutes, how many times did it look up with its ears also standing straight? So how many times was it vigilant in those 5 minutes? Or you can look at the time duration that that animal spends on that particular activity. How much time does that animal spend in feeding during a day? How much time does it spend resting during a day? All of these things. Then you can see latency. So latency is basically the amount of time that has passed after the stimulus before the behavior is performed. So basically, say if there's a call of a predator, say there's a kite calling from the sky, so how much time after that, after hearing that call, does the smaller birds take to fly off or to take shelter? That would be the latency of the behavior. Okay. These are different things. These are different sort of informations that you can get out of your ethogram or out of your sampling methods. Okay. So this is an example ethogram. So you have an ethogram of all the behaviors of, say, a dog. So they have, so this is how you define or how you describe the behavior. So they have described something as sniffing, where that bird is sorry, that dog is sniffing around, and it's basically, it may be investigating a site, or it is just trying to see what all odors are around it. There's licking, it could be licking something. Then they describe something as phlegm. It's curling the upper lip to facilitate transfer of odors. So these are all the different ways in which that they have defined their ethogram for the dog. Scent marking, toying, biting, all of these things. Okay. So this is how you can carry out description of the different behaviors. So that was my last slide for today. We can discuss anything else that you guys would like to talk about. One important thing that I missed to put in these slides was about sociality or living in a group, maintaining groups. This was covered in the lectures that there are various different costs and benefits that come along with living in groups. So we can discuss those. Can you guys tell me what are the major costs that you would face when you are living in a group? If you're a group of, say, if there if there is a herd of, again, say there's a herd of black bucks, so what are the costs that they're facing because of being in that group, and consequently what are the benefits they are having? Yes, they have to share their resources exactly with the other individuals. Very nice. So they will be competing for the same resources because they're individuals belonging to the same species, consume the same resource, they will have to share them. Another cost would be also sharing of parasites, or if, since they're living in such close proximity to each other, if one of them gets a disease, it is very easily transmissible to all the other individuals around that in the same group. Then if there are like 5 6 individuals living in a group, they are going to act as attractors. They're going to attract predators towards them, because obviously the predator is going to find all of these individuals in a small space, so it is going to get attracted. And if you're living in a group, you can lose paternity. It could be that you are mating, like more than one males is mating with the same female, so you don't know who is the parent, who is the actual father of that offspring. And then in the case of birds, you could face brood parasitism. So there are these cooperative breeders. There are birds that in which in the group only one or two nests are built in a group of, say, 10 or 20. There are these birds called babblers. You might have heard of them. They are these cooperative breeders in which only one is the mating pair and all rest are helpers with them. So in this example of cooperative breeders, you can see very different behaviors. You can see altruism, in which all the helpers, instead of reproducing themselves, they are helping the active mating pair. Because why? Because they are related to them because of kinship. And so when they are helping them bring up the brood, they're basically helping them raise their siblings, and they share the genetic material with these siblings and such. So these are the benefits. You're getting help from the kin as well. As you said, that would be a benefit. Other benefit would be that you have an increased protection from the predator. Yes, there is more eyes. If you are in a group, there are more more eyes to look out for the predator. Okay, if you're in a group anyway, because of probability, if there are 10 of you, the probability of you getting picked up by the predator is obviously 1 by 10th. It is already, instead of being solitary, the probability of being preyed upon decreases when you're in a group. Then there is an increased access to mates. In the case of, say, lions and lion prides and such, when they have multiple females, in a group, you have an increased access to mates in the group. And there is yes, and the benefit was the help of kin, all of these things. So talking about this babblers, or so I have worked on babblers for my MSc thesis. That is why I know a little bit about these cooperative breeders. So they, in them, they have this one pair which is actively like mating, and they lay the eggs, and all of the rest are helpers. So you obviously wonder, why are they helping? Why are they not increasing their direct reproductive benefit? Why are they not making their own nest? But that is because of kin selection again. In this case, they're helping the parents bring up their own siblings. So that is going to help them. Another behavior that is observed in those groups, there is allo grooming. So one of the birds is going to clean up the other bird. There is allo grooming, there is auto grooming. Auto grooming is when the individual is grooming itself, when the individual is cleaning its own feathers and its own removing its own parasites, ectoparasites. Allo grooming is when the individual is cleaning the other individual. So when you see, why do they perform allo grooming, that is sometimes because they allogroom the parts of the body that they cannot reach themselves. They allogroom the area near their eye because they cannot reach it with with their own beak, and such. These are the benefits that they derive from living in groups, from living in close proximity. In babblers, you also observe alarm calling. So basically, there will be one of the individuals that will sit on a high perch as a sentinel, while the other ones will be foraging on the ground. This sentinel, who is sitting high up on a perch, has a better viewpoint for looking out for predators. So it is going to look out for the predators, and as soon as it spots one, it is going to give out an alarm call. Why is it doing it? If it's giving out an alarm call, obviously the predator is going to spot it faster and may feed upon it. But again, there is altruism in this behavior of protecting its skin while they're foraging. So there are these different kinds of behaviors that are observed out there, and some of them are harmonious, some of them are inharmonious, but it depends on what you're looking at and how you want to study them. So that is all I have for today. If you guys have any doubts, or you want to discuss anything, or you want to ask any questions, I am here, and we can discuss things. Otherwise, if you have no doubts, you're welcome to leave the meeting. Thank you. Anybody has any doubts from the slides or from the lectures, or in general you might be wondering about something? Why have evolution favored specialist predators? So evolution would have favored specialist predators because the environment at the time, yeah, there is a risk of extinction in the long run, but if the environment is pretty stable and they are very good at exploiting the resource, then they'll be able to consume that resource very quickly as compared to any other generalist that is going to use the same resources. So if you're a specialist, you have this special niche, you can consume the resource very efficiently, you can get a lot of nutrition out of it, and hence you can increase in numbers very quickly. So that is why we still have specialist predators, because they are very good at what they're doing. Yeah. What do you want me to explain about parasitism? Basically, parasitism, like the broad definition would be, there is a parasite which is mostly, a parasite will be smaller than the host in size also. So there's a parasite that depends entirely on another organism for living and for its nutrition. So it is going to parasitize the host. So it is going to derive its nutrition from the host, and this is going to obviously going to harm the host. And there are different types of parasites. There are ectoparasites, there are endoparasites. That ectoparasites live on the surface of the body of the host, endoparasites live inside the host. Is there something specific that you want me to explain about parasitism? Okay. Anything else? Anything you'd like to discuss? If you don't have doubts, you can please you can leave the meeting. But if somebody has doubts, you can ask me. Okay, I will end this meeting now if there are no more doubts. Thank you so much for the session. Bye, guys.